In this video series, I'm going to start talking about logical fallacies. It'll probably take me several segments to get through it. Logical fallacies pose as arguments, but really they're errors. There's a problem in thinking. I have not always understood logical fallacies, but when I started to study these things and understand them, I began to see how much people use logical fallacies to try to win arguments, and sometimes they can be very persuasive because they sound really clever. Let me give you an example. Back when I used to spend a whole lot of time on the internet and what they used to call not chat rooms but forums, there was a newspaper in Lexington, North Carolina that had a forum. And I used to love to go there and engage in discussions and arguments and just to have a good time because I enjoy the interaction. Well, sometimes we would get in pretty heated debates. And there was this one guy. Now, people had fake names back in those days. And there was one guy named Zardoz. And Zardoz had a picture to represent himself that was Mark Twain. And I really just couldn't stand the guy, because he was obviously very progressive and very obnoxious. He was knowledgeable, seemingly knowledgeable. And I noticed that any time there would be any sort of debate, any sort of argument, Zardoz would appear, and he would almost always tie people up in knots with his arguments. And he would say things that I was not able to respond to. Always, I thought there was something wrong with them, but I just wasn't sure what was wrong with them. Well, then I started teaching logical fallacies to my class. Excuse me. And when I went over logical fallacies and went back to that forum, I realized this guy Zardoz wasn't using good reasoning at all. He was applauded for using good reasoning by other people who were on his side. But really, he was using errors in logic. He was using clever rhetoric, but not good logic. And so one time, we were having one of these discussions, and once again, he appeared, and I don't even remember what it was we were discussing, but he used a logical fallacy. In fact, I think he might have used several logical fallacies in his post, and I called him out on the logical fallacies. And guess what? He disappeared. I didn't see him for the remainder of the time that I was on that forum. Now, I don't know that I banished him from the forum with my incredible intellect or anything like that, but he wasn't able to respond because I called him on it. And the more of these logical fallacies you know, the clearer your thinking is going to be. And when people make bad arguments, you're going to see it. And it'll become all too clear. So let's begin with some basics. Just in case you're not familiar with what an argument actually is, we need to define our terms. I find that most people in our culture don't even recognize an argument. In fact, if you say, hey, let's have an argument, people think you're going to yell, maybe throw a chair, maybe throw a punch. That's not what we're talking about. Here's an argument. An argument has several elements. First, an argument will have a premise. Arguments have to have at least one, but usually they have at least two. So you'll have a premise and a conclusion at the minimum, and that, my friends, is an argument. Now, here's how you can tell what a premise is. Think of a premise as kind of like your evidence. If you like to write essays, your premises are your topics. Your conclusion would be your thesis statement. All right? Your conclusion is the decision you arrive at based on your premises. You could think of a case in court. Your premises would be your evidence. Your conclusion would be the verdict reached by the jury. And so here's how you can tell oftentimes what you're dealing with. It's by what they start with. Sometimes a premise will start with because, or for this reason, or if, or based on the fact that. Conclusions often start with therefore, thus, consequently, hence, and it follows that. Now, these aren't always the words that will be used, but these are some typical ways that you can figure out the difference between a premise and a conclusion. Let me give you an example of an argument. And I have color-coded it for you. Because George had a low SAT score, and he wasn't a member of the NHS or Beta Club, it follows that he will never achieve success in life. Is that an argument? When I ask my students this, typically most will say, no, that's not an argument. But in fact, it is an argument. It's just a bad argument. It does have premises. The premises here are because George had a low SAT score and because he wasn't a member of NHS, that's National Honor Society or Beta Club, then the conclusion is he will never achieve success in life. Not true at all. It's an argument, but it's a bad argument. Now let's look at what are not arguments. Assertions are not arguments. An assertion is a conclusion without any supporting premise. In other words, what passes for an argument oftentimes is a mere opinion. And again, as I said a minute ago, I think most people in our culture can't even recognize this. They live on opinions, but they have no premises. They have no evidence whatsoever for the things they say they believe. Here's an example. George will never achieve success in life. That is a naked assertion, some people would call it. The Bible is full of contradictions. If you're going to say that, you better find me some contradictions. And I find that when people actually say the Bible has contradictions, they can always be resolved. They're either difficulties or they are a seeming contradiction that turn out not to be contradictions. Here's another one. Barack Obama is the most effective president in our nation's history. He might be, but we don't have any premises to make that determination. And really, to make a statement like that, we would also have to define what it means to be an effective president. If it means to get things done, sure, he was pretty effective. If it means to be constitutional and defend the Constitution as he swore to do, one of the least effective presidents in our history. If it's to create a mess by passing legislation, well, he did a pretty good job. So those are all assertions. And here's another one. This is just from my classroom. The UTT textbook is full of lies and hatred. UTT is Understanding the Times, the class that I teach. I've actually had students tell me this in the past, that the book was false, it was misleading. And then when I would ask if they actually read the book, the answer would be no. The book is not full of lies and hatred. In fact, it's full of documentation. It's full of sources that it cites. But, it's easy to make this kind of assertion because you don't have to do anything about it. Now, if anybody ever gives you an assertion like this, force them to give you premises. Make them give you evidence. Don't just let them get by with this kind of thing. Another thing you have to keep in mind with regard to reason and logic is the law of non-contradiction. Sometimes people will make contradictory statements. What is a contradiction? Well, the law of non-contradiction says a statement cannot be true and not true at the same time and in the same respect. And here are some examples. It cannot be raining and not raining at the same time and in the same respect. Now, let me show you a difference here. I could say it's raining and it's not raining, and that would not be a contradiction. But if I said it's not raining in this room, it is raining in this room, that would be a contradiction. You see the difference? Here's another one. The universe can't be both infinite and finite. Those things can't exist together. So that's what we mean. And so for something to actually qualify as logical, it must pass the test of the law of non-contradiction. Okay, now, so let's look at logical fallacies. What are logical fallacies? They are arguments. So that means they have premises and conclusions. The problem is they use faulty reason. And I'll show you what I mean. And these are just a lot of fun. I really, really enjoy teaching logical fallacies, and I enjoy spotting them too, to be quite honest, and calling people out on them. So let's begin. There are different categories of logical fallacies. We're only going to look at two categories. The first category of logical fallacies is something called the fallacy of ambiguity. Now, you're going to notice that with all these logical fallacies, I have images at the bottom of the screen to give you a little bit of a clue as to what the fallacy is going to be. And so here, I love to show this picture because this really dates me. And when I show my students, nobody ever knows who this is. And so I simply ask them, is this a guy or a girl? And they'll, half the class will say a guy, half the class will say a girl. And then I said, well, what if I tell you this person's name? Will you be able to tell if it's a guy or a girl? Well, yeah. And I say, Pat. Well, Pat doesn't tell you if it's a guy or a girl. What if I said that this person is engaged? And I'm going to tell you their fiance's name. And they say, yeah, that'll clear it up. And then I say, well, their fiance's name is Terry. Does that clear it up? Well, no. Pat actually turns out to be a character from Saturday Night Live. I can't remember if this was the late 80s or early 90s. But Pat was ambiguous. Pat was gender ambiguous. Pat was androgynous. And so this is this kind of fallacy. It's a fallacy of ambiguity. And so let me give you an example. Now, I haven't given you the name of one of these yet. But here's an example. If somebody said all men are created equal, ? If that were so, then there wouldn't be so many rich people. Now, that sounds plausible on the face of it, but there's something wrong with that. And so let's take this apart. Where did the phrase come, all men are created, where did the phrase come from, all men are created equal? Well, it comes from the Declaration of Independence. When Jefferson penned that phrase, all men are created equal, did he mean anything about their wealth? No, he did not. He said that we're all created equal in that we all have God-given rights, namely to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And so what this person is doing is changing the meaning of all men are created equal. Here's a similar one. If all men are created equal, then why am I so short? That's what I'd like to know. I'm tired of being average. I want to be tall. Again, they changed the original meaning of created equal. Here's another one, a very famous saying. We must all hang together, or most assuredly we shall hang separately. There's a word here the meaning is being changed, and it's the word hang. In the first meaning, hang means stick together. The second time it's used, it means to execute somebody with a rope. And by the way, Benjamin Franklin was the one who made this statement, and it was kind of some dark humor during America's War for Independence. So what is this called? This is called an equivocation. Equivocation occurs when we use different definitions for the same word, or when it is taken in a way differing from what we intended. And people can be slippery with equivocations, so you got to watch them. Now, everything else that we're going to look at is a fallacy of relevance. A fallacy of relevance. That is, the conclusion is not relevant to the premise, or the premise is not relevant to the conclusion. You can go either way. And so you can see the image down there. Here's your first fallacy of relevance. If you make abortion illegal, women will have to return to back alley butchers to get their abortions. Now, if you're debating abortion, why would you say this? Or somebody who's in favor of abortion, why would you make this statement? It is an argument. But what's their premise? Their premise is really a feeling. They want you to feel something here. They want you to feel bad. Here's another one. Every year, millions of people around the world build new homes and put groceries in bags made out of trees taken from the Amazon rainforest. It's estimated that 12 species of animals become extinct every 65.944 seconds. Don't you think you should do something about this? How are they trying to motivate you here? Well, they're using emotion, and that emotion is pity. This is an appeal to pity. It's when the argument tries to persuade the listener to feel sympathy for the individual or group for whom they are arguing. But they're not really presenting good premises. They're not really giving you evidence. They're just trying to make you feel bad.